All right, all right. Welcome back to Real Estate Bites. We come at you live every Friday here on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Coming at you with statistics, with local news, with insights. The topic of the week this week is buyer agency. It's been a minute since anybody's had we've heard a whole lot about the NAR lawsuits and the shakedown or the shakeup of all that, and what's going to result of it. And for good reason, we haven't heard anything because certainly for Right Sales Team, it's still business as usual. Things are going to change, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. But by and large, it's business as usual. So the things that are going to change for sure with the results of these lawsuits is there's two major changes that are going to happen in the industry. The first is that on the MLS, the listing broker is no longer going to be allowed to advertise a co-broke commission. So traditionally, a commission is negotiated with the seller and the listing broker, and then that commission is split between the listing broker and whatever broker brings the buyer. And then that buyer's broker's commission would be advertised on the MLS. So if I'm looking for properties for my buyer, and I can scroll to the bottom of the cut sheet on the MLS, and I can see what commission is being offered by that seller. That is no longer going to be allowed. Okay, that's one of the major changes. The second major change is going to be that it's going to be required that buyer brokers have an exclusive agency relationship with a buyer before they begin showing homes. That buyers are going to have to sign an exclusive agency agreement. And I want to talk about that today because this is something that's coming down the line here. It's supposed to start here in a couple months, mid-July, might get pushed back a little bit further as things get ironed out. But buyers, you're going to see this. This is going to be something that's put in front of every single one of you, from every single broker, every single agent within those brokerages. It's something that we're not going to be able to avoid. And really, we shouldn't want to avoid it. I think this is a good change. I'll talk about that later. But what I wanted to do was show you guys what this exclusive buyer broker agreement is going to look like physically, talk about what it means and how it's going to affect everybody. So let's jump right into that. Let's take a look at the buyer broker agreement. This is Russell Real Estate Services buyer broker agreement. This is obviously the brokerage I'm with. This is what they call their Russell commitment to buyer agency. So I'm going to jump around a little bit here to talk about what this is. Let's start here, line number 8. The purpose of this agreement is to establish an exclusive agency relationship between the buyer and Russell Real Estate Services. Okay, and that is an important point that we're going to talk about later on, but this is an agreement, an exclusive agency agreement between the buyer and the brokerage. What that means is when you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, sign this agreement, you're signing for a certain amount of time, a retainer period, right? That you're only going to work with this brokerage to find your home. Okay. So the real, here's where we get to the real nitty gritty of this whole thing: compensation to broker. So as I stated before, listing brokers are no longer allowed to advertise a co-broke commission on the MLS. So buyer's agents have no idea if there's any commissions that are being offered by the seller. Okay. And that's, not necessarily a good or bad thing. It just is, right? So typically we could see exactly how much we're going to make. In the future, we're not going to be able to see what our commission would be to help you find your next home. So I don't know anybody that I work with who wants to work for free. I sure as hell ain't working for free. So now we have this section here starting at line number 28, right? The compensation to the broker. And in here is where we specify exactly what the commission will be when we sell that house. Now, just because the listing broker is not advertising the commission, it doesn't mean that the seller is not going to be offering a commission for the buyer broker. Okay, so for that matter, in this market, and I started that with that meme on purpose. The most popular kink among millennials is role playing as a couple that owns a house. I started with that because, as we all know, housing affordability is lower than it's ever been, right? It's very difficult for people to afford a house. And so if you're asking a buyer to bring a down payment, closing costs, lender fees, et cetera, and a commission, well, that's going to wipe out a ton of buyers out of the market. So while there will be sellers who say, no, I'm not going to offer anything, I think most sellers are going to, even if they don't want to offer anything up front, they're eventually going to be compelled through some sort of agreement and contract to offer some sort of commission, or they're going to wipe out a large amount of the buyer pool. So whatever commission they're offering, right, you would subtract whatever's agreed upon here at line 28, and that would be what the buyer now needs to bring to the table to pay towards their agent's commission. So if the seller is offering less than what's agreed upon in this agreement, then the buyer brings the remainder. If the seller is offering more than what is agreed upon in this agreement, well, then the buyer doesn't need to bring anything. And of course, if the contract's negotiated where even if the seller wasn't offering anything at the beginning, if it can be negotiated that they're going to pay a certain amount, well, then that makes a difference. And it's funny to me because one of the major arguments for the plaintiffs in these lawsuits was that people were overpaying for houses because commissions were built into the price. I disagree with that take. I disagree strongly with that take because, values of homes were always, the opinion of values are always generated by looking at comparable sales. And, that's not going to change. That's not going to change. People are going to still look at the comparable sale. They're not going to deduct what they assume to be was the commission paid to come up with a value. They're going by the comparable sale. So even in this case, even if sale prices are going higher so that commissions can be deducted from the top end of the sale price and still satisfy the seller, well, then you have a higher purchase price. So really now more than ever, commissions are going to be built into the sale of the home, the purchase price. So nevertheless, this just talks about what is owed. This exclusive agreement, it says right in here that a commission will be paid whether it's, regardless of how it's purchased. Another thing that's in here too is commissions can be paid on a house that a buyer's agent has shown a buyer even within a year after the expiration of this agency period. If that buyer goes back and buys a house that this agent in this agreement showed to them, that agent may be subject or may be entitled to some form of compensation or commission for the sale of that home. And, historically, Russell never goes after people for these things, but if there's shenanigans, if you go show somebody a home a month after, a month prior to the expiration of this agreement, 2 weeks prior to the expiration of this agreement, and the buyer somehow opens the line of communication with that seller, they decide to wait for this thing to end so that money can be saved on commissions, and then they go and buy that house, and the buyer's agent finds out about it. Yeah, the buyer and the broker, or the buyer's agent and the broker, can go after that buyer for that commission. Some other things in here that are important to know, fair housing's in everything. There are protected classes. We cannot discriminate. We know that, right? It talks in here about the buyer's duties to the agent. You've got to give them the information. You got to give us the information that we need to present to a seller in order to enter into a contract. Also you by signing this, you're saying you haven't signed one of these anywhere else, right? It talks in here about, listen, Mr. Buyer, there's people got cameras, video cameras. They're recording us walking through the house. They're listening to us. You got to be aware of that, and you got to be careful of what you say when in somebody's house. And as we all know, they don't have to be, evident. They don't have to be obvious. There are many very discreet ways to place a camera inside of a house. Other things in here, Ohio sex offender registration and notification laws. The buyer assumes all responsibility to obtain information from the authorities regarding registered sex offenders in the area. That is not on us as agents. It's not on the seller. It's not on the seller's agent, right? And that's the gist of it, guys. This is an exclusive agreement that is going to be required between agents, brokers, and buyers here in the near future. And again, I just wanted to give buyers out there a heads up as to what that looks like and what it means. And listen, this is a good thing, guys. I really believe so. I believe it's a good thing for a number of reasons. For us agents, it creates that exclusivity. It creates a loyalty that may not necessarily have been there beforehand. There are buyers out there, believe it or not, who will, work multiple agents to see for whatever reason, but they'll call multiple agents without any consideration of the people's time, who they're spending, without really caring what that agent is putting in by time and money into the house search. There's just no loyalty. So this creates that exclusivity and that loyalty for the buyer. It creates a greater degree of professionalism. Look, when you sit down in front of an agent and they've got to go through this agreement with you and discuss this process, you're going to know pretty quickly whether or not they know what they're talking about, whether or not they have a solid strategy or approach to the market, and how they're going to be able to help you. So this, in a sense, is a good way to help you get a feel for your agent and interview them appropriately. I know one thing that I might consider would be something to cause fear for buyers is, okay, so you sign this exclusive agreement and now I'm stuck, right? Now I'm stuck with this agent and they're going to do whatever the hell they want. And I'm stuck. I can't go anywhere. And maybe this agent sucks. Maybe they're not doing their job. They're not responding to the phone, but I'm stuck in this agreement. That's not the truth, guys. It's not the truth. If you remember early on in there, it's the purpose of this is to establish an exclusive agency relationship between the buyer and the broker. So the agreement is between, again, the buyer and the brokerage, not necessarily the agent. Okay. So much like a listing agreement, we agents don't own the listing. And in this particular agreement, we individual agents don't own you as a buyer. You're not our buyer. You're the broker's buyer client. So what that means is if your agent sucks, if they're not doing a good job, if they're not calling you back, then you call that brokerage and you say just that. Hey, this agent sucks and I want a new one. And that brokerage is going to find you an agent. Okay. That brokerage is going to find you an agent that they trust, that are going to go and do a good job. So by you, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, signing this agreement with an agent and a brokerage, the pressure is on for that agent to perform. Beforehand, obviously, if the agent wasn't doing the job and you hadn't signed anything, well, you could just move on, right? And find a different agent and go do your thing. And, that was easier. It was easier for you, the buyer. But it was also easier for the agent too, because as you moved on, most people aren't calling and complaining. They're just moving on. And so the agent kind of gets away with being a shitty agent, but if you fill this out and now you're under an exclusive agreement with a brokerage, the agent is now under the gun to perform, because if they're not doing their job and you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, want to call that broker and say, give me a new agent, well, there's heat, right? There's now heat on that agent from that broker. Why Mr. Agent, Mrs. Agent, did you not perform? Why did you take this exclusive agreement and then fail to be a fiduciary or fail to be responsive to this client? So this agreement creates a required level of professionalism from the agent that wasn't necessarily there before. All right. So this is coming, guys. This is probably the biggest change in the everyday practice of agents. It's going to be the biggest change that you, the buying, consuming public, are going to see in the relationships you have with agents. If you want to go buy a house, you're going to need to sign a buyer broker agency agreement. When? Great question. Again, it's supposed to start mid-July, could get pushed back, but that's coming. All right, now that we have covered the topic of the day, let's move on to this week's statistics. Okay, here we go. Episode number 41. This morning, there were 338 single-family homes and condominiums for sale in Lorain County. Again, these statistics come from the MLS. I only pull for Lorain County, but Lorain County provides a pretty strong sample size, again, not only for Northeast Ohio, but basically the Midwest. So again, inventory remains low. This is not going to change anytime soon. And it is the reason why we see home prices where they're at today. The demand line right here, you can see last week was huge. We have almost half the amount of sales this past week than we did the week before. 47 closings in the past week leading up to today. 1,694 square feet was the median square foot for homes sold last week. The median home value was $237,000. The median square foot value was $152.25 a square foot. And homes spent an average of 41 days on market for homes sold last week. The market for interest rates woke up at 7.15% for a 30-year conventional note. And the big sale of last week, $1.275 million in the Britannia Estates neighborhood in Avon Lake. So let's go take a look at this big brick beauty. Again, $1.275 million. Some interesting facts about this house. You've got over 5,000 square foot home, just a gigantic home. And that's all in the above ground levels. 2,009 square foot finished basement on almost an acre, 0.94. Ladies and gentlemen, this house has 5 fireplaces in it. Okay. This palace had 5 fireplaces in it. The pool out back is salt water. You don't really get to see much pool because everything was frozen when these pictures were taken. But a saltwater pool. There's a putting green on the premises. Just a big, gorgeous, beautiful home in Britannia Estates in Avon Lake. We'll just keep on scrolling through these pictures so you can see how beautiful this monster was. I mean, I love an office. I love a library. How about an office with a fireplace in it? Man, that's just fantastic. 5 fireplaces in this house, folks. Big, giant, beautiful master bath. Yeah. This place was awesome. Want to keep scrolling till we get into the basement. There you go. This basement's pretty awesome. Nice big wet bar, home theater, right? And then you have the wine room. I mean, come on. That's just amazing. The wine cellar in the basement, right next door to the workout studio. So you spend some time in the wine room, then you go on over here, pump some iron, have an inflated opinion of your looks after a few glasses of wine. And that is a great morning. Okay. That's all I got. Thanks again for joining me, guys. Until next week, as always, take care of yourselves. Take care of one another. I love you, people.